was wondering if you could tell us a story.
Oh, which one would you like to hear?
It'd be nice to hear a little family history.
A little grandma history.
A little grandma history.
Well, okay. I'll start with my own parents. Both of them came over to this country in about the mid-1890s, and they did not land at Ellis Island. At that time, Ellis Island hadn't been built. They both landed at the Castle Garden, and but they didn't know each other. They were both from Poland, but they didn't know each other in Poland. And one of the stories my mother tells.
What were their full names?
Well, my mother's name was Minnie Blumenkrantz, and my father was Anchel, A-N-C-H-E-L, Salts, and his, however, in this country, they called him Arthur. But anyway, they were both from Poland. My father was raised in a small village not too far from Krakow. Trying to think the name of it, but I can't. At any rate, he was from a family of 11 or 12 children. I'm not sure how many. I'm not sure whether it's 11 or 12. And he was one of the younger children. His parents ran a general store, and they lived on what's called a shtetl, which is a Jewish community. They had lots of contact with non-Jews too, and I don't think it was very happy contact. Their experiences were not good. He never really talked about them, but in my later years, when I was already in high school, college, all I had to do is say the word Poland, and all the blood would drain from his face. But at any rate, I don't think that they were poor. I'm sure they didn't have a lot of money, but I never got the impression that they were ever lacked for food and lodging.
Did they go to school?
They went to school for about, the boys went to school for about 3 years. Now, I think the girls probably went to some schooling, although it wasn't as serious as the boys, because I remember aunts who were able to read and write. However, my father had at most about 4 years of schooling, and he could read and write quite well in Yiddish. And he did pick up some English. He always read a Jewish paper, and it was one of the children's jobs to get him to the newspaper in the morning. He read something called Das Tag, T-A-G, which means the day. But anyway, to get back to Europe, he was apprenticed. He must have been probably 13 years old when he was apprenticed to a furrier. So when he came over to this country, he already had a very good way of earning a living. So he always made out well. In fact, he would say that among the Jewish people in his area, it was considered a sin to raise a child without teaching that child an occupation, a way to earn a living. So that was foremost. Of course, everybody was bar mitzvah. And his schooling consisted primarily of learning to what he needed to know of Hebrew in order to be part of the congregation for a Sabbath service. He always went to synagogue in this country when he came to this country, although I must say he was not a really seriously observant Jew. He saw to it that his boys were given a Hebrew education and that they were both bar mitzvah. However, he mainly went to synagogue on high holidays. We all went on high holidays, but it was primarily Papa's job to do that.
Where were you living then? Were you in
We lived in
Jamaica?
In Jamaica, New York.
What was your house like?
Excuse me?
What was your house like?
We lived in a two-family house. Papa was always interested in real estate. See, after they came to, well, I'll go back a little bit. I'll go back to Europe. And the essential reason that my father and his brothers came to this country was that if they remained in Poland, they would have been drafted into the army. And he told us that that meant a term of about 20 years. It wasn't like the United States, where you served a 2 or 3 year term in the army.
Can I get you something to drink?
It's what?
Can I get you something to drink?
Yeah.
Some tea or some water?
Just a glass of water. All right, turn it off so. Well, but to get back to Europe, the town that he came was Tarnoff, Tarnoff, and it's since become quite a thriving city. Although the time that he lived there, it was a small town. But at any rate, they sent their sons. And as a matter of fact, daughters who wanted to go, but it was mainly the sons, and they saved money to bribe the officials, because it was well known that you could get out of the country if you had money to give a bribe.
Now, was this, this is what Poland, or what's now Poland. Was it Poland then, or was
no, it was Austria-Hungary.
It was Austria-Hungary.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, at the time that my parents lived in Poland, it was Franz Joseph who was the potentate, and he was rather well loved by people. In fact, my father didn't have much to say about him, but my mother expressed rather goodwill toward him. He evidently did a great deal for the country, and I believe the Austrians liked him too. But at any rate, they didn't think very much of having to stay in the army for 20 years. But at any rate, so now he came to this country. He was older than my mother. He must have been about 20. But at any rate, I don't really know too much about his upbringing. My aunts told me that he was a very serious person, and he wasn't carefree as so many of as other of the young men were. He didn't dance and have a good time and drink like occasionally the others did. Of course, I knew a couple of my aunts who were in this country, and I particularly remember the oldest one who came here met a man and was getting married, but she felt very badly about getting married without her parents, and so they sent her portraits of themselves. They had pictures taken and sent them over, and then she was willing to get married. I don't know what happened to the portraits, but at any rate, we were not a really close family when they came to this country. All of the brothers and sisters were in the New York area, but of course in those days it would take you a couple of hours to get, say, from Jamaica to the Bronx using public transportation. So while we did visit, it was not a lot of visiting. At any rate, to get to my mother, she was born on a farm owned by Polish landowners, and her father was hired as a supervisor, which sounds pretty good, but actually I'm sure it wasn't. Their home was a dirt floor house. There were about 10 children, and while I never had heard any stories of them going hungry, they seemed to have the necessities of life. It doesn't sound like an easy life, and my mother recalls that one cold night, my father came running toward the house, yelling to his wife to open up the door because wolves were chasing him. So, it was certainly out in the country. At any rate, my mother was...
What were your grandparents' names?
It was her maiden name was Blumenkranz.
Right.
What her own mother's name was, I don't remember. But the family name was Blumenkranz. But at any rate, I've seen pictures of the old people, and I would say that they probably lived in Tarnów and Krakow and that area from about at least the mid part of the 19th century. but I don't know of any stories that go any further than about the mid-19th century. Now, my mother was adopted by an aunt and uncle who lived in Krakow because they had no children, and her natural parents had too many children. So she was really considered the lucky one. The others had a couple of years of school, but my mother was very proud that she had graduated from the 8th grade. They took good care of her, and they would have sent her on to high school, but at that time Jewish children were not permitted to go to the Polish high schools. I'm sure that there were, at the time, there were probably, I shouldn't say I'm sure because I'm not sure, but my guess is that there were Jewish gymnasium, but that it would have been quite expensive to have sent a child there. But as again, I say, I'm not sure. But she did have a good education. She learned German in the early grades, and of course German the whole time that she was there, because German was the official language.
Right.
And
so she would have spoken Yiddish and Polish and German?
yeah, so she spoke the 3 languages. And she probably knew some Hebrew, although I don't think very much. But at any rate, it was. I think that she had a good childhood. I got the impression from her that Krakow was a beautiful city. She one time says, "You think you have parks here? You don't have parks." She says that's no comparison to the parks in Krakow, and they used to go to the park with large hoops, something like the hula hoops that we have today, and one of the entertainers was pushing the hoop along. But at any rate, just to get back to her education, I would say that was probably the equivalent of a 10th grade education in this country. She knew geometry, algebra. Of course, she was fluent in German. In fact, they wrote in German. They even we later got some correspondence from her sisters who remained in Poland, and they were the letters were in German.
So they were probably only literate in German.
They were literate in German, yeah. Although she could write in Polish, yeah. When we were children, we could all understand Yiddish, although they mostly spoke English to us, but they spoke a lot of Yiddish to each other. But if they didn't want us to understand what we were saying, they spoke Polish, and we could not understand Polish. So at any rate, when she graduated elementary school, she was apprenticed to a what do you call it? What did they call people who made hats?
Milliner.
She was apprenticed to a milliner, yeah. But at any rate, I must say that the times that she considered great was when her uncle had too much to drink. She thought that was, the kids used to think that was wonderful, because when he had too much to drink, he'd buy them candy. He was wonderful to them. It wasn't that he was, she never spoke about them being mean at all, but he was especially mellow when he had something to drink, which was quite different from my father, because the only time that he would drink would be with holiday, with when we had a Seder or some kind of religious occasion. He might have had a little schnapps otherwise, but he really did not drink. But anyway, so we have Mama was apprenticed, but the aunt and the uncle felt that there was no future for her in Poland. When you consider anti-Semitism and the fact that the Jewish men were leaving, they felt that the only future for her was in America. And of course they were not rich, but they saved. And she had an aunt who lived in New York. And so, I don't know whether she was 16 or 17. I thought she was 17, but my sister Helen says that she was 16 when she left for Europe, left Europe for America. And as I grow older, I realize the pain that must have been, because I'm sure that they did not expect to see her again. They wouldn't have had the money on their part to have traveled to America, and I'm sure they didn't know whether there would be the money for her to return. But at any rate, many, many years later, I must have been about 13, 14 years old when she got a letter from Poland, and she was crying because evidently the uncle had died before. I didn't know when, but the letter she received was that her aunt had died. So that they had to feel very strongly that there was no future for her to have taken a 16-year-old girl and let her come to America. And when she came to America, and she tells the story that when she got off the boat at the Castle Garden, she saw a penny on the street, a couple of pennies, but she said she wouldn't stoop down to pick them up because that they had told her that in America there was gold in the streets. So, you know what their expectations were. At any rate, she made it out pretty well because she.
Well, compared to living on a dirt-floored,
Yeah.
House in the woods where wolves are chasing you.
Yeah. But at any rate, she went to night school practically as soon as she got here. And after she'd been here, I think about 3-4 months, she was working in Bloomingdale's as a salesperson. Mm-hmm. So she told me that she was there a few months, but they didn't keep her because she was having trouble writing the receipts. Evidently, she could communicate enough in English to sell, but was having a little trouble with the writing. But at any rate, she worked in the needle trade until she met Papa. And see, Papa was considered a landsman because he lived not far, because they both lived in the same area. So I gathered that, of course, they lived down on the east side. There must have been young people who got together who were from the same area in Poland. And I still remember songs. She was lively, much livelier than my father. And so there was a great variety of songs that they sang. And they were English. They were English. And you got some feel of the culture of the early 20th century. One of them described and I remember it so well because she would sing to us when we were children. In Jersey City, where I lived well, a college boy, I met Dada. he took a strange girl upon his knee and told her what he wouldn't tell me, and so forth and so forth. So that most of their songs were of love affairs and betrayal and that type of thing. So that was the soap opera of the day. But at any rate, soon after they were married, my father went into clothing business.
How did they meet?
I really don't know how they met, but it must have been that the culture of the Lower East Side, where people lived very close together, and my guess is that the aunt or somebody that she worked with introduced her to someone from her town. But I really don't know the details of it. But at any rate, she always helped in the business, and they did well. As soon as he could, he bought real estate, and some of of course, a lot of it he lost during the Depression, but some of it he was able to keep, which took us through the Depression. So that I'd say he was a pretty good businessman. And actually, we lived pretty well when I think about it. We have 5 children, and I recall that every time a child was born, because the most that I remember is when my youngest brother was born, there was always, we were all born at home, but there was always a doctor and a nurse who came to the house for the delivery. People didn't go to the hospital in those days. You went to the hospital if you were going to die. But at any rate, she had a woman come to do for her, to help, for a month. It wasn't a matter of a couple of days, but I remember my sister slept, it was big double beds, and so my sister, Libby, slept with the woman who, I'm sure it wasn't a trained nurse, but it would be women who would go around and help when a baby was born. And that was a full month, so that it was, nobody would think of a woman who had just given birth getting up and taking care of the family in a couple of days, as is done in this country. I mean, as is done of course it was this country, as done in modern times. And when she helped my father a good deal in the store, we had a maid who, in fact, my first memory is standing at the window, on the windowsill, watching my brothers and sisters in the backyard, and a German nurse was dressing me. So, of course, in those days, it was very inexpensive to have a full-time maid, because that was how the young immigrants came to this country, right, and stayed as maids, and of course, and they got married they didn't go out and get themselves an apartment. They stayed with the person they were working for until they were married.
Right.
So at any rate, that's how they both got here. And their siblings came, and some of the arguments I can remember in the family was when Papa helped one of the uncles to come over, and he didn't pay him back. So that, stuff like that caused a lot of hard feelings. But at any rate, people did bring each other over, and they helped each other when they came over. But as I say, once they got here, I don't remember the cousins being terribly close. We did visit, and the kids got together, but the distances were so far that it wasn't that easy. And my mother always felt some distance from the other children in the family because they had grown up together, whereas she had not.
Right.
So that I think it made a difference. But at any rate, looking back, I'm not going to say that we were a great big happy family, because actually there was always quite a gulf between the children, and certainly between myself and my parents. And most of the time they didn't know what I was talking about, because obviously my own experiences were not theirs.
Right.
They really couldn't have cared less whether I went to college or not, frankly. The boys were supposed to be educated, but girls were supposed to get married. And there was no great, they were, I never remember anybody feeling or telling me how great it was that I did so well in school. I'm not sure. I guess you were expected to, school was school. You were expected to go to school. But I don't remember any particular pride that, Also, children were not praised. It wasn't thought that it was a great idea to praise children and tell them how wonderfully they did. I don't know why, but I never missed anybody telling me that I felt that I was pretty proud of myself. I was a good student, fine. But I didn't think my parents had to tell me that. It just was different, We're always telling our kids these days how great they are, what a nice job they did. No way. Might have been part of it. The old way was that self-praise was no recommendation, and you weren't expected to have your children feeling that they were very special. Now that I think of it, it's really funny. But at any rate, I think children were much more independent than they are today. Nobody would think of whether or not you were entertained, or if you had enough to do, or that's funny even to think of it. But we did. We were given excellent care. I mean, looking back at it, of course, I never thought anything back the care, but it obviously was, in retrospect, it was certainly excellent care. Their whole lives were built around the welfare of their children. No question about that.
How long did you live in Jamaica?
We lived in Jamaica. I left all my life, my young life, and I didn't leave Jamaica until I finished college.
Where you went to City College?
Yeah, I went to Brooklyn College.
Oh, Brooklyn College.
Of course, in those days, you didn't need any money to go to college. If I had needed money to go to college, I don't think I would have gone. But I was one of the rich ones in college because I got $2 a week to take care of my transportation and whatever else I needed. And that was compared to what other kids were getting when they went to college. That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I fared very well. In fact, could take in a couple of Broadway shows, matinees at 55 cents. So, no, I think we made out very well in college and school.
What did you study?
What did I study? I was a biology major to begin with in college. In fact, I graduated as a biology major, but by my third year in college, I had taken, I took a psychology course, and I knew that this was just great, and I liked it so much that although I maintained, I was already too far along to drop the biology, I came out with as many credits in psychology as I did in biology. But college was a wonderful experience, and it was, of course, it wasn't anything much of a burden on the family because in those days you couldn't get a job anyway. So
Right.
that
When was this?
I graduated high school in 1936. So it was from 1936 to 1940.
Right.
And you know, we were not doing well, believe me. And Pop had some rental property. And I think that was primarily how he was able to even feed the family, because times were very, very bad.
Right.
And no, people didn't, even if you got a job, you were paid so little. And you see, I had not taken commercial. If you were headed for college, you took an academic course. You could take either academic or business. I don't remember that you're having any other choices. But if you took a business course, of course, you learned to type and to take steno if you were a business student. And you were prepared to go out into the business world.
Right.
But if you took an academic course, you couldn't take typing because there wasn't room for typing. You couldn't take commercial courses.
Right.
You were either academic or business. And so, I thought I had a pretty good high school education. But I'll tell you frankly, when I hit college, and took science, I didn't know what hit me. So that was not an easy transition. But it was nice that we had city colleges because I don't know how there were very few people who could afford tuition for private colleges in those days.
Right.
And of course the city colleges were good. And you were not admitted to a city college without, you'd have to have an average of probably above about, maybe in high 80s to get into college at all. Any of the city colleges. So there was no such thing as open admission.
Right.
But it was a good time. No
And then
question.
then you went to graduate school, right? Or did you wait a while?
Well, that's a whole other story. Yes, I did go to graduate school, but I did wait a while to do it. Yeah.
Did
But what I'd like to tell you about was the rise of Hitler. We were very much aware of it in this country. I did go to Sunday school. We belonged to the Jewish Community Center, and all of us went to Sunday school. And of course the boys went to Hebrew school. And incidentally, there was nothing like the celebrations of Bar Mitzvah when our kids, with my brothers.
Right.
Mama made a sponge cake, and we bought a bottle of wine, and that was, you brought that to the synagogue, so you had the Bar Mitzvah, and then everybody had sponge cake and wine.
Right.
So, but at any rate, I really liked Sunday school. At that time, the Jewish Community Center was very modern. It was a new building. We had a swimming pool and a gymnasium.
In Jamaica, right?
In Jamaica. And so every Sunday, we had Sunday school, and some of the, there must have been the college kids or older, they were 17, 18, 19-year-olds that took charge of the Sunday school.
Right.
And taught the Sunday school. And they were very nice. So we studied Bible, and then after Bible, we had the, which I liked incidentally, and then we'd have the whole congregation would gather, and the rabbi would talk. They'll give some, well, the service, it was really a lecture or a speech or whatnot. And at Hanukkah, we each got a box of Hanukkah candy. But at any rate, when I got older, we had clubs after Sunday school. And we played basketball and went swimming. And we had some socials, so that it really was very nice. Because I can remember walking home. I didn't have hair dryer, so I can remember walking home with ice in my hair. But at any rate, that was very nice. I have very nice memories of Sunday school. But I can remember the rabbi talking, and it had to be in the mid-30s, about Hitler and the rise of Hitler and the worry. And I also remember, we still had family in Poland. Not everybody came here.
Right.
So from both sides of the family, they were in Poland. And my mother, they would get letters from them, and they corresponded with them. And as a matter of fact, my sister Libby had a pen pal in Germany because she studied German in high school. And I can remember when the pen pal wrote to her and said that she would couldn't write to her anymore because Libby was Jewish. And this was in the 30s, and I remember when she got the letter. And then what happened was terrible. And I still have letters. Helen gave them to me to keep. And of course, I'll give them on to you. And the letters were to help them come over to America. And we didn't have the money to do it. And when you look at those letters, you can't understand why. I can't understand why my parents didn't find some way to get them across. But they didn't.
What year was this?
This was in the late 30s.
In the late 30s?
Yeah, the late 30s. And the last letters that we got was Vergiss uns nicht, which means don't forget us. And then we didn't get them. And they died, all of them. send you the paper that Abby did
No,
on
you
the
didn't.
Holocaust?
No.
Did I give it to you?
No, you didn't.
Oh, I'll send it to you. Yeah. Yeah. When Abby was there, I guess she must have been in the 7th grade, they had to do a project. Now, how she picked out the Holocaust as a 13-year-old, I have no idea. But she did. And her teacher told her she'd have to narrow a subject and that she should use Spielberg's Schindler's List. So she
Right.
did. And she said, Grandma, you're going to find me somebody who was saved by Schindler. I mean, she thinks Grandma can do anything, pull it out of a hat.
Right.
But as a matter of fact, I did. She wasn't saved by Schindler, but she worked in Schindler's factory.
Right.
Because this woman maintained that Schindler didn't save her, God saved her.
Right.
But at any rate, Schindler did help to save her. But at any rate, she did end up in a concentration camp. But I'll send you the whole thing. And I do write to her, so keep up the correspondence. But at any rate, they died. But well, you can imagine, as the years go by, and I acquire, I hope, some wisdom, there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not thankful for this country, because this is the only country in the world. Of course, countries are improving, and certainly England is good and so forth, but there's no country like this country, because I feel that the Jews really feel a sense of belonging here, which they never did in Europe. And you see, one thing that people don't understand about anti-Semitism in Europe is that anti-Semitism was the law, the official law,
Right.
in most countries of Europe. In fact, Sigmund Freud said that he hoped that none of his boys would want to become physicians because the struggle was terrible. The restrictions on who could go to college, who was admitted, and so forth. It wasn't just what a particular college wanted to do.
Right.
It was national law. So, you can imagine what a difficult life it was. But at any rate, there always was a Jewish bourgeoisie who prospered in Europe, and they're the ones who were the later immigrants who
Right.
came over during the 30s and the 40s. They were the ones who could send their children to the gymnasiums and did quite well, and really did want to depart from a really very pleasant life.
Right. I was thinking about something else while you were talking about going to college on a much lighter note.
Yes.
Did you have a boyfriend when you were in college?
I
Or
went
more
out.
than- or
I went out.
boyfriends?
I went out, but no, I did not have a boyfriend. No. In fact, most people went out,
Mm-hmm.
but marriages were later too.
Right.
It was a depression, and in fact, in this country, we had the lowest birth rate that the country has ever had, either before or after, between 1930 and 1940. Because, there was no welfare,
Right.
and you were not going to bring a baby into the world that you couldn't feed. And I can remember going to college there was one of the teachers whose wife was a student, and I was very friendly with her. And occasionally we and another of my friends were invited to their house for dinner. And it was so wonderful because we could go out and buy stuff for dinner. And, you know, I saw they had an apartment, and I wondered if I would ever be able to have an apartment, not a home,
Right.
and be like the teacher. That's how bad it was. At 25% unemployment at the time. And when you talked about what you would do when you graduated, you really didn't know what you'd do, because the most you could aspire to would be a job in Macy's on Thursday night and Saturday. That's after college. So, of course, when I approached graduation, I decided, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but that I would go to graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Because what could you do?
Right.
Of course, what happened was that when we were in college, one of our aspirations was to get a government job. Because if you had a government job, you were set. And so they used to give these exams, junior chemist, junior biologist, assistant bacteriologist, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. And I thought it would be great to be a bacteriologist. That'd be wonderful. I mean, there's nothing about psychology, so. But at any rate, I took about 4 or 5 of these exams. Well, I graduated in 1940, and I still didn't know what I was going to do. So I had done some waitressing up in the, not the Catskills, but the, oh dear,
Poconos.
the Poconos, yes. I had done some waitressing in the Poconos. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. When I graduated, it was summertime. So I went back up to the Poconos. I had applied for some schools, one of them being, I thought about a social work school, because at least you'd have some idea that maybe you could get a job.
Right.
And a lot of psychology was in social work too. So I applied to social work school. How I was going to go, I had no idea. But anyway, I applied. And in the meantime, I went up to the Poconos to waitress. And while I was at waitressing, I got a call from one of my sisters, brother, I don't know, I guess one of my sisters, that I had gotten a telegram from Washington. They were doing the 1940 census. And so they needed temporaries to do the census. So who did they pick?
All these people that took the exams.
That's right. So do you think I went?
Yes.
Naturally. A government job? $14.40 per annum? Oh my God! How lucky could you get? And of course everybody was very excited. I'd gotten a job in Washington. So off I went to Washington. So at any rate, got a furnished room. I found somebody for a roommate. Somebody who I'd known very vaguely in college. But at any rate, when I went into the cafeteria for breakfast that first day, I felt as though I was in the college cafeteria. It was because all of the people who came to that, who worked at the Census Bureau at the time, were college graduates,
right.
recent college graduates. So at any rate, there I was. in the agricultural census. And you know, the funny thing about it is that years later, I picked up, I don't know, some magazine, and somebody had was writing an article about the census. This must have been maybe 10, 15 years ago, and said that the best census that they ever did was the 1940 census. And the only machine they had was a punch card machine. And everything was done by hand. But they could do any run they wanted to. They could do anything. Because they had the people to do it. It was a lot of fun. And I was only there about, I graduated in June. So in August, my roommate was going to a party. Somebody had invited her to a party on the Potomac. Had the parents had a summer place at the Potomac or something. She wasn't working for the Census Bureau. I think she was with the War Department. They didn't call it the Department of Defense. It was the War Department.
Right.
No euphemisms. The War Department. So she was working for the War Department. So she asked if she could bring her roommate. And that's when I met Lou. Was on the Potomac at the party. And, you know, we talked and whatnot. And the next day, when I went for breakfast at the Census Bureau cafeteria, there he was. And so...
Looking for you?
What?
Looking for you?
No.
Oh.
No. But of course, you know, I know him. So we had breakfast every morning and then supper every night and so forth. So that we really were married a few months later. It wasn't one of these long engagements.
What was your anniversary?
The 29th of October.
1940?
Yeah. Didn't fool around. Well, let's say we didn't fool around very long. But at any rate, you know, we saw each other every day. It wasn't a Saturday night date, and spent a lot of time with each other. So,
Where'd you get married?
in Washington,
Where in Washington?
the courthouse. Our friends came along, and we married. Very independent.
Did you have a party or anything?
With our friends, yeah. But, you know, it wasn't... but, of course, what happened was that the next time we went to Chicago, his parents were furious with us. Just furious. But we were we were very independent in many, many ways. I was never really close to my parents emotionally. And as far as my mother was concerned, my goal was to do about the opposite of what she did. So, I mean, you know, there you go with, what can you predict of, you know, I should have had a terrible time in life and felt alienated, but I really didn't. So, but at any rate, they were furious. But at any rate, they had the whole family, and they had a big party for us when we came. So, of course, they told me what they thought of me. Of course, it was my fault, naturally. But at any rate, what can I say? But, you know, it was not an easy time. And the appointment at the Census Bureau was not a long appointment. It was a year.
Right.
And Lou got a job at the department, at a, actually this was the institution, Washington Institution for the Mentally Disabled. And you know, Lou had been an ag major, in the University of Illinois. And he got a job on their farm, in the dairy farm. And we lived there. This was outside of Washington. It was a district training school. And I decided, fine, I'll go to school. So that was when I went to social work school, to the National Catholic School of Social Work, part of Catholic University. So my diploma is from Catholic University in Washington. And
So you got that's where you got your master's in
master's in social work.
social work.
I didn't finish until after the war, though. In the meantime, we had your mama. And then, of course, when Marion was 10 months old, was inducted. And he came back when she was 3. So, you know, we had a good time in the Census Bureau. In fact, we had a very lively time. We put on a play called The Nonsensus of 1940, which was really a very funny production. And there were a lot of marriages, believe me. You know, because people were meeting really peers from all over the country.
Right.
And it was fun.
How did Lou end up? How did Grandpa end up at the census?
How did he end up what?
At the census, what was?
Oh, well, not what we were doing. All we're doing in the census, for the most part, was editing. I don't know whether he was in the ag census or not. Which part of? But you know, as I said, we were all in the Census Bureau. What I did was to edit the agricultural questionnaire. You see, the questionnaire, the farmers, anyone who had a certain amount of land had to was interviewed. They were interviewed.
Right.
They were, and a schedule was filled out, and the schedule had about 50 questions on it. Well, in order to even punch them and to make any sense at all, they had to be at least logical. In other words, you couldn't have 2 acres and produce 1,000 bushels of wheat. So you went over the whole schedule and you changed it if it needed to be changed in some way so that it would be consistent. So it was a production kind of thing. You know, it wasn't fascinating work at all, but it wasn't, you know, you had to use some judgment.
Right. It was better than waitressing in the Poca.
Yes, it was. Yes, it really was. And we got so much money. Oh my God. And another thing, you only had to work a half day on Saturday. You know, when I look back at it, what was so wonderful about it, today, you know, oh really, you had to work a half day on Saturday? Well, we thought this was, oh God. And there was plenty to do. And, you know, there were wonderful places to eat. For about 50 cents, you got an 8-course meal. So, of course, you know, we ate out all the time. But it was very nice. But like everything else, it doesn't last. It didn't last. Nothing lasts. So, what can you say? But at any rate, and then, you know, we had lots of friends.